The phone buzzed against the marble countertop of my kitchen, interrupting the quiet evening I had been enjoying. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop. Mother Thompson flashed across the display, a name I hadn't seen in 5 years. My finger hovered over the decline button, muscle memory from countless ignored calls in the past. But something made me answer. Dara. Her voice was crisp, formal, exactly as I remembered. Mrs. Thompson. I kept my own voice steady, professional. Years of dealing with difficult customers had taught me to mask my emotions perfectly. I'm calling about dinner this Saturday. The whole family will be there, Alex, his new girlfriend, Uncle Robert, everyone. We thought it was time to reconnect. The words hung in the air like smoke. Reconnect. As if 5 years of silence had been a simple misunderstanding instead of their complete abandonment when I needed them most. As if they hadn't chosen sides when Alex's affair came to light, painting me as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't let go. Where? I asked, though something in her tone already told me. Celestial. It's that new upscale place downtown. Very exclusive. I do hope you can manage the expense. I almost laughed. Celestial. My flagship restaurant. The crown jewel of my empire that they knew nothing about. The irony was so perfect it felt like the universe was finally paying attention to my prayers. I think I can manage, I said simply. Wonderful. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked around my penthouse apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. 5 years ago I had nothing. 5 years ago I was sleeping on my sister's couch, crying into cheap wine while Alex moved his mistress into our marital home. 5 years ago, his family had made it clear that I was the problem, that I had driven their golden boy into another woman's arms with my unrealistic dreams of becoming a chef. Now I owned 5 restaurants across the city. Now I employed over 200 people. Now I was worth more than Alex and his entire trust fund family combined. And they had no idea. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my walk-in closet, selecting my outfit carefully. Nothing too flashy, I didn't want to give away my success too early. I chose a simple black dress, elegant but not obviously expensive, and modest jewelry. Let them think what they wanted to think. The drive to Celestial gave me time to think. 5 years of silence, and now suddenly they wanted to reconnect. The timing seemed strange. I wondered what had prompted this invitation. Had Alex finally realized what he'd lost? Did they need something from me? Or was this just another opportunity to remind me of my place in their world, which was nowhere at all? I pulled into the valet parking area of Celestial, my own restaurant. The young man who approached my car was Marcus, one of my best servers who also worked valet on busy nights. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized me, but his training kicked in. Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Celestial. Thank you, Marcus. I slipped him a 20. I'm meeting a party under Thompson. They should already be seated. Yes, ma'am. The hostess will take care of you. Walking through the entrance of my own restaurant felt surreal. The warm lighting cast everything in gold, the soft jazz music I had personally selected played in the background, and the scent of my signature dishes wafted from the kitchen. This was my world now. This was what I had built from nothing. Sarah, my hostess, greeted me with a professional smile that didn't quite hide her surprise at seeing me here as a guest instead of the owner. Good evening. You must be joining the Thompson party? That's right. Right this way, please. As we walked through the dining room, I noticed several regular customers who knew me as the owner. They looked confused but said nothing. My staff was well trained in discretion. And there they were. Seated at table 12, the round corner booth that was actually one of our most expensive spots, though they probably didn't know that. The entire Thompson family in all their glory, already deep in conversation and laughter. They looked exactly the same, wealthy, comfortable, and completely convinced of their own importance. Alex sat with his back partially to me, his dark hair perfectly styled, wearing what I recognized as a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Next to him sat a blonde woman I didn't recognize but could easily guess the identity of. This had to be Rebecca, the latest girlfriend. The family had clearly embraced her, based on how close she sat to Alex's mother. Mother Thompson spotted me first. Her smile was sharp as a blade, all teeth and no warmth. Dara? How wonderful that you could make it. Please sit down. The only empty chair was directly across from Alex and Rebecca. Perfect. I settled into my seat, smoothing my dress and placing my purse beside me. The conversation died for a moment as everyone took in my appearance. You look... Alex's father began, then seemed to struggle for words. Well, thank you, Mr. Thompson. I folded my hands on the table and waited. "We weren't sure you'd come," Alex's sister Jennifer said. She had always been the most direct of the family. "It's been so long since we've all been together." 5 years, I said simply. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. The weight of those 5 years, the divorce, the taking of sides, the complete radio silence hung between us like a wall. "Well," Mother Thompson said brightly, clearly determined to push past the awkwardness, "we should order some wine. Something celebration-worthy. After all, we have so much to catch up on." She raised her hand to signal our server, and I had to bite back a smile when I saw who approached. David was one of my most experienced waiters, someone I had personally trained. He had worked at Celestial since we opened 3 years ago. His face remained perfectly neutral as he approached our table, though I caught the slight twitch of recognition in his eyes when he saw me. "Good evening, folks. Can I start you off with some drinks tonight?" "Yes," Mother Thompson said imperiously. "We'll have a bottle of your best champagne. Price is no object." David nodded professionally. "Excellent choice. I'll bring out our Dom Perignon if that suits you." "Perfect." As David walked away, Jennifer leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "So Dara, tell us everything. What have you been up to all these years? Are you still cooking?" The way she said cooking made it sound like a hobby, something cute and quaint that I had outgrown. I could see the expectation in all their faces. They were waiting for me to admit failure, to confess that my dreams had been childish fantasies. "I am," I said simply. "That's nice." Rebecca spoke for the first time, her voice sweet but with an edge underneath. "Alex told me you used to have such big dreams about opening restaurants and things like that. It's good that you found a more realistic path." I tilted my head slightly. "Did I?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes that was probably meant to be charming. "Well, I just assumed. I mean, this economy, starting a business is so risky. Smart people play it safe." "Rebecca's in finance," Alex said, speaking directly to me for the first time since I'd sat down. "She's very practical about these things." "How practical?" I murmured. David returned with the champagne, going through the tasting ritual with Mother Thompson, who made a show of savoring it and pronouncing it acceptable. As he poured glasses for everyone, his eyes met mine for just a moment and I saw the question there. I gave the slightest shake of my head. "Not yet." "A toast," Uncle Robert declared, raising his glass. "To family reunions and new beginnings." We all raised our glasses, though the words felt hollow. As I sipped the champagne, which was indeed excellent, since I had personally selected it for our wine list, I wondered what game they were really playing. This wasn't a simple family reunion. There was an agenda here, I could feel it. "Now then," Mother Thompson said, settling back in her chair with the satisfied air of someone about to deliver a performance, "we really must hear all about your life, Dara. Are you working somewhere nice? Seeing anyone special?" The interrogation was beginning. The questions came like gentle probes at first, each one designed to seem caring while actually gathering intelligence. I recognized the pattern from years of dealing with this family. They never attacked directly, preferring to circle their prey with seemingly innocent inquiries until they found a weakness to exploit. "I'm working," I said, taking another sip of champagne. "Keeping busy." "That's wonderful," Jennifer said with false brightness. "Where are you working now? Somewhere downtown?" "Here and there." My vague answers were clearly frustrating them, but I was enjoying watching them try to extract information without seeming too obvious about it. Rebecca looked particularly annoyed by my evasiveness. "You know," she said, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I think it's so admirable when people pursue their passions, even when they don't work out. There's no shame in having to find more traditional employment." "Is that what you think happened?" I asked mildly. "Well, isn't it?" Uncle Robert jumped in. He had always been the most direct of the family, never bothering with subtlety. "Last we heard, you were talking about opening some restaurant or something. Obviously that didn't pan out, or we would have heard about it." The assumption hung in the air like smoke. They were so certain of my failure that they couldn't even conceive of another possibility. I found it almost endearing in its complete wrongness. "Would you have?" I asked. "Heard about it, I mean?" The question seemed to catch them off guard. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the first sign of emotion I'd seen from him all evening. "Of course we would have," Mother Thompson said stiffly. "This isn't such a large city. Success in the restaurant business is quite visible." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. Very visible." David approached our table again, his timing perfect as always. "Are we ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes to look at the menu?" "We'll order," Mother Thompson declared, though I noticed no one had actually opened their menus yet. She grabbed hers and began scanning it quickly. My goodness, these prices are quite substantial. It's a very exclusive establishment, Rebecca said knowingly, though I could tell she was also taken aback by the numbers. This is exactly the kind of place Alex and I love to come to. We're quite familiar with fine dining. I bit back a smile. Rebecca was clearly trying to establish her sophistication while also taking a subtle dig at my presumed lack of familiarity with expensive restaurants. If only she knew she was sitting in my creation, eating food prepared by chefs I had personally trained. The menu looks amazing, Jennifer said, though she was clearly calculating costs in her head. Dara, are you sure you're comfortable with? I mean, this seems quite expensive for someone who's still getting back on their feet. There it was. The first direct jab at my presumed financial situation. I looked around the table at their expectant faces, all waiting to see if I would admit I couldn't afford to eat here. I think I can manage, I said simply. Really? Uncle Robert's eyebrows shot up. Because I have to say, I'm a little surprised. Last time we spoke, you were in quite a difficult situation financially. And that was, 5 years ago? It takes time to rebuild from nothing. Yes, I agreed. It does take time. So what are you doing for work now? Alex asked directly. It was the first real question he'd asked me all evening, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. Seriously, Dara. We're all curious. I studied his face for a moment. He looked older than his 35 years, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were married. His hair was still perfect, his clothes still expensive, but there was something different about him. Something tired. I cook, I said simply. The table erupted in barely concealed reactions. Jennifer tried to hide her smirk behind her menu. Rebecca's eyes went wide with what looked like pity. Mother Thompson's lips pursed in that particular way that meant she was about to deliver what she considered wisdom. Oh, sweetheart, she said in the tone she might use with a child who had just confessed to believing in Santa Claus. Cooking as a hobby is lovely, but surely you have a real job to pay the bills? Cooking is my real job. As a line cook somewhere? Uncle Robert asked. Or maybe catering. That can be quite profitable if you build up a clientele. Something like that. David cleared his throat politely. Have we decided on appetizers? The family reluctantly turned their attention to ordering, though I could see they were all dying to continue the interrogation. They ordered lavishly oysters, the lobster bisque, truffle-stuffed mushrooms. Everything expensive, everything designed to show off their wealth and sophistication. When David looked at me expectantly, I smiled. I'll have the chef's tasting menu. The words caused a stir around the table. The chef's tasting menu was the most expensive option on our menu, a 7-course journey through our finest dishes that cost more than many people spent on groceries in a month. The chef's tasting menu? Rebecca's voice pitched higher. Are you sure? That's quite ambitious. I'm sure. But Dara, Jennifer leaned forward with fake concern, that's almost $300. Are you certain you can afford that? I met her eyes steadily. Why wouldn't I be able to afford it? The silence that followed was thick with unspoken assumptions. They were all thinking the same thing. How could someone they assumed was struggling financially justify spending that kind of money on a single meal? It's just, Mother Thompson said carefully, we want to make sure you're being responsible with your money, given your situation. What situation is that? I asked. Another uncomfortable silence. They had backed themselves into a corner where they would have to state their assumptions directly, and none of them wanted to be the one to do it. Alex finally spoke up. Come on, Dara. We know things have been tough for you. There's no shame in admitting you're still rebuilding your life. Is that what you think I'm doing? Rebuilding? Aren't you? Rebecca asked pointedly. I mean, after the divorce you lost everything. The house, the savings, the lifestyle you were used to. Starting over from scratch at your age can't be easy. I took a slow sip of my champagne, letting the words settle over the table. She wasn't wrong about the starting over part. I had lost everything in the divorce. What she didn't understand was what I had built from that nothing. You're right, I said finally. I did start over from scratch. The satisfaction that spread across their faces was almost comical. They thought they had gotten me to admit defeat, to acknowledge my reduced circumstances. They had no idea they were about to watch me turn their assumptions inside out. But you see, I continued, setting down my glass with deliberate precision, starting over can be quite liberating. When you have nothing left to lose, you can take risks you never would have considered before. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair. Risks rarely pay off, my dear. Especially in the restaurant business. Do you know what the failure rate is for new restaurants? Over 80% close within the first year. That's quite a statistic, I agreed. Tell me, Uncle Robert, how familiar are you with the restaurant business? I know enough to recognize a poor investment when I see one. Interesting. And what makes you think I made a poor investment? The question seemed to stump him. He looked around the table for support, but everyone else was equally confused by my continued confidence in the face of their obvious skepticism. Well, he said finally, if you had succeeded, surely we would have heard about it. Success in business isn't something you can hide. Can't you? I asked softly. David returned with our appetizers, presenting each dish with the theatrical flair I had trained him to use. The oysters were arranged like jewels on a bed of ice, the truffle mushrooms glistened with herb oil, and the lobster bisque was presented with a small pitcher of cream that diners could pour themselves for the full effect. These look incredible, Jennifer said, momentarily distracted from the interrogation by the beautiful food. She took a bite of her oyster and her eyes widened. Oh my God, this is amazing. The flavor is so complex. The chef here is quite talented, Mother Thompson agreed, though she said it with the air of someone making a concession. I have to admit, this is exceptional. I watched them eat my food prepared by my chefs in my restaurant, while they speculated about my failures. The irony was so perfect it was almost painful. You know, Rebecca said, delicately dabbing at her lips with her napkin, this really is restaurant-quality food. Not that I'm surprised places like this don't get their reputation by accident. What kind of reputation does this place have? I asked innocently. Oh, it's quite well known, she said with authority. Very exclusive, very high-end. The kind of place you have to book weeks in advance. Alex and I are lucky we were able to get a table. I nodded thoughtfully. How did you manage that? Alex's mother has connections, Rebecca said proudly. She knows how to get into the best places. Mother Thompson preened slightly at the compliment. It's all about who you know in this business. The right connections can open any door. That's very true, I agreed. Connections are everything. As we ate, the conversation continued to dance around the central question they all wanted answered: how was I affording this lifestyle they assumed I couldn't maintain? They probed and hinted and made increasingly obvious comments about the cost of the meal, the exclusivity of the restaurant, the general expenses of living in the city. Through it all, I remained calm and vague, giving them just enough rope to hang themselves with their own assumptions. Each course that arrived made their confusion deeper. If I was struggling financially, how could I order so confidently? If I was just a line cook somewhere, how could I afford to eat at a place like this? The truth was sitting right in front of them, in every perfectly prepared dish, in every smooth interaction with the staff, in every detail of the restaurant that bore my personal touch. But they were so convinced of my failure that they couldn't see what was right before their eyes. By the time our main courses arrived, the tension at the table was palpable. They had expected this evening to be a victory lap, a chance to see how far I had fallen and perhaps offer some condescending assistance. Instead, they were faced with a mystery they couldn't solve and a confidence they couldn't shake. The evening was just getting started. Rebecca had been relatively quiet during the appetizer course, content to let the family lead the interrogation while she observed. But as our main courses arrived, she seemed to decide it was time to establish her dominance more directly. This duck is absolutely perfect, she announced, cutting into her entree with theatrical precision. Alex, you were right about this place being exceptional. It reminds me of that restaurant we went to in Paris last month. The comment was clearly designed to establish several things at once: her relationship with Alex, their shared travels, and her familiarity with international fine dining. I watched Alex's face as she spoke and saw a flash of something that might have been irritation, quickly covered. The Paris restaurant was different, he said quietly. This is more sophisticated. Oh, absolutely, Rebecca agreed quickly, though I could tell she was annoyed at being corrected. I just meant the quality, the attention to detail. You can tell when a kitchen really cares about excellence. I found myself studying Rebecca more carefully as she spoke. She was undeniably beautiful, blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, blue eyes, a figure that spoke of expensive personal trainers and careful diet management. Her dress was designer, her jewelry was real, and her makeup was flawless. She looked exactly like the kind of woman the Thompson family would approve of for their golden boy. But there was something desperate in the way she kept glancing at Alex, seeking his approval for every comment she made. Something insecure in how she emphasized their relationship, as if she needed to constantly remind everyone that she had won the prize. Dara, she said suddenly, turning to me with a bright smile, Alex told me you used to cook for him when you were married. That must have been good practice for your current work. The comment was seemingly innocent, but it carried multiple barbs. It reminded everyone of my former role as Alex's wife, reduced my cooking to domestic duties, and suggested that my current work was somehow lesser than what I used to do. I did cook for Alex, I agreed pleasantly. Among other things. It's so sweet when women enjoy traditional roles like that, Rebecca continued. Though of course in today's world, we have to be practical about career choices too. I imagine it must have been quite an adjustment, going from being a housewife to having to support yourself. The word, housewife, hung in the air like an insult. I had never been a housewife. I had worked throughout my marriage, contributing to our household income while also managing most of the domestic responsibilities. But Rebecca's comment wasn't about accuracy. It was about establishing a hierarchy where she was the successful career woman and I was the displaced domestic. Adjustment can be good, I said mildly. It teaches you what you're really capable of. That's such a positive attitude, Jennifer jumped in, her voice dripping with false encouragement. It's so important to stay optimistic, even when things don't work out the way we planned. What didn't work out? I asked. The question seemed to surprise her. Well, your marriage for one thing. And your restaurant dreams. I mean, we all had such high hopes for you, but sometimes life has different plans. Does it? My continued refusal to acknowledge failure was clearly frustrating them. Uncle Robert set down his fork with more force than necessary. Look, Dara, we're all family here. There's no need to pretend things are better than they are. We know the divorce was hard on you financially. We know your business plans didn't work out. We're not judging you for it. Aren't you? Of course not, Mother Thompson said quickly. Failure is a part of life. The important thing is learning from it and moving forward realistically. What did I fail at? I asked directly. The blunt question seemed to catch them all off guard. They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to challenge their assumptions so directly. Your restaurant, Alex said finally. The one you were always talking about opening. You had all those plans, remember? The business proposal you showed me, the location you had picked out, all those recipes you were always testing. I did remember. I remembered staying up late into the night, working on business plans while Alex watched television. I remembered the excitement in my voice when I talked about my dreams, and the polite disinterest in his responses. I remembered how his family had listened to my ideas with the patient smiles adults give to children who want to be astronauts. I remember, I said softly. We all wanted it to work out for you, Rebecca said with mock sympathy. But the restaurant business is so difficult. Most people who try it end up losing everything. Is that what happened to me? Well, didn't it? She asked, confused by my continued questions. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They were all so certain of my story, the failed entrepreneur who had to abandon her dreams and take whatever work she could find. They had written my narrative without bothering to check if it was true. Tell me, I said, what makes you think I lost everything? Because you disappeared, Alex said, his voice carrying a hint of his old anger. After the divorce you just vanished. No contact, no updates, nothing. People don't do that when they're succeeding. Don't they? No, they don't, Rebecca said firmly. Success is something people want to share. If you had actually managed to open a restaurant, if you were doing well, we would have heard about it. You would have wanted us to know. Would I? The questions were starting to visibly irritate them. Rebecca's perfect smile was beginning to crack around the edges, and Uncle Robert was gripping his knife a little too tightly. This is ridiculous, Jennifer said suddenly. Dara, just tell us what you're doing for work. Are you a server somewhere? A prep cook? There's nothing wrong with honest work, but stop being so mysterious about it. I'm not being mysterious, I said. I told you I cook. Where? Alex demanded. For whom? In what capacity? I took a sip of my wine, a beautiful Bordeaux that I had selected for our wine list after tasting dozens of options, and considered my answer. I cook for people who appreciate good food, I said finally. That's not an answer, Rebecca snapped, her composure finally cracking. Look, we're trying to be nice here, but your evasiveness is getting annoying. We know you're struggling. We know things have been hard. Why can't you just admit it? What would you like me to admit? That you failed, she exploded, then immediately looked embarrassed by her outburst. She glanced around the table, but no one seemed surprised by her reaction. If anything, they looked relieved that someone had finally said what they were all thinking. Failed at what? I asked calmly. Everything, Rebecca said, her voice rising despite her obvious attempts to control it. Your marriage failed. Your business plans failed. Your whole life fell apart, and instead of admitting it and asking for help, you're sitting here pretending everything is fine while ordering food you can't afford at a restaurant you probably can't pronounce the name of." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca looked shocked at her own words, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could take them back. The rest of the family looked uncomfortable but not exactly disapproving she had said what they were all thinking. I set down my wine glass with deliberate care and looked around the table at each of them in turn. 5 years of silence, and this was what they thought of me. This was the story they had told themselves about my life. "You think I can't pronounce celestial?" I asked quietly. The seemingly random question caught them off guard. Rebecca looked confused, as if she wasn't sure what I was referring to. "That's the name of this restaurant," I explained helpfully. "Celestial. Did you think I couldn't pronounce it?" "That's not. I didn't mean," Rebecca stammered. "Because pronunciation has always been important to me," I continued conversationally. "Especially with French culinary terms. Mise en place, julienne, brunoise, brigade de cuisine. All those words I learned in culinary school." "Culinary school?" Jennifer asked weakly. "Oh yes. I went back to school after the divorce. Funny thing about having nothing left to lose, it makes taking risks much easier. I enrolled in the Culinary Institute, graduated top of my class, did my externship at Le Bernardin in New York." I could see the confusion spreading across their faces as they tried to reconcile this information with their assumptions about my life. "But that's just education," Uncle Robert said dismissively. "Education doesn't guarantee success in business." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But it helps when you're trying to create something exceptional." David appeared at our table again, moving with the smooth efficiency I had trained into all my staff. "How is everything this evening? Can I get you anything else?" "Everything is perfect," I said, looking directly at him. "Please give my compliments to the chef." "I certainly will," David replied with the slightest hint of a smile. "Chef will be pleased to hear that." As David walked away, I caught Rebecca watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. "You seem very comfortable with the staff," she observed. "Do I?" "Yes. Almost like you know them." I smiled. "Maybe I do." The conversation had taken on a surreal quality, with my former family growing more frustrated by my evasiveness while I sat in the middle of my own restaurant, surrounded by my own staff, listening to them debate my failure. But Rebecca's observation about my familiarity with the staff had clearly planted a seed of doubt in her mind, and I could see her starting to put pieces together that didn't quite fit their narrative. "How would you know the staff here?" she asked directly. "I eat out a lot," I said simply. "But this place is nearly impossible to get reservations at," Mother Thompson interjected. "I had to call in several favors just to get us this table tonight." "Did you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What favors were those?" She looked uncomfortable, as if she had revealed more than she intended. "Well, I have connections in the hospitality industry. People who owe me favors." I nodded thoughtfully. The truth was, we had held the table for her because my assistant had recognized the Thompson name when the reservation came in. I had specifically instructed my staff to accommodate the booking, knowing this evening might be interesting. But Mother Thompson's assumption that she had pulled strings to get us seated was fascinating. "It must be nice to have those kinds of connections," I said. "It is," she agreed, her superiority complex firmly back in place. "In business, it's not what you know, it's who you know." "Is that how you see it?" "Of course. Take this restaurant for example. Do you think it succeeded because of the food alone? Please. There are dozens of talented chefs in this city. The difference between success and failure is backing, connections, marketing, and yes, sometimes luck." I found myself studying her face as she spoke. This was the woman who had raised Alex, who had shaped his values and worldview. This was the woman who had convinced him that my dreams were unrealistic, that my ambitions were naive, that success was only possible through the right connections and family money. "What about hard work?" I asked. "Hard work is admirable," Uncle Robert said condescendingly, "but it's not enough on its own. You can work as hard as you want, but without capital, without connections, without the right background, you'll never compete with people who have advantages." "People like you?" "Well, yes," he said without embarrassment. "We've been fortunate. We understand how business really works." I glanced at Alex, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange. He was staring down at his plate, cutting his steak into precise pieces but not actually eating much. There was something in his posture that reminded me of the man I had once loved, before his family's influence had poisoned our relationship. The memory hit me without warning, sitting in our old kitchen 5 years ago, showing him my business plan for the third time. I had spent months researching locations, calculating costs, dreaming of the day I could serve my food to people who would appreciate it. But every time I tried to share my excitement with him, I was met with the same polite disinterest. "It's a nice dream, Dara," he had said, not even looking up from his phone. "But be realistic. Do you have any idea how much money it takes to start a restaurant? How many fail in the first year?" "I've done the research," I had insisted. "I have a solid business plan. The numbers work." "The numbers always work on paper. Real life is different." "So you won't even consider it? Won't even look at supporting me in this?" He had finally looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. It wasn't just doubt, it was embarrassment. He was embarrassed by my dreams. "Dara, my family has money because they make smart investments. Restaurant ventures aren't smart investments. They're vanity projects for people who don't understand business." "Is that what you think this is? A vanity project? I think you're a talented cook and I think you should keep it as a hobby." That conversation had been the beginning of the end, though I hadn't realized it at the time. Within 6 months, I would discover his affair. Within a year, I would be sleeping on my sister's couch with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of broken dreams. But that wasn't the whole story. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask about, was what happened next. The lowest point had come 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I was working 3 jobs: prep cook at a diner during the day, server at a chain restaurant in the evenings, and weekend catering gigs when I could get them. I was living in a studio apartment that was barely larger than Alex's walk-in closet, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford furniture. I remember the night I sat on that mattress eating ramen noodles and crying into my cheap wine, wondering if Alex's family had been right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe my dreams really were just fantasies. Maybe I should give up and find a realistic job, settle for a life of quiet disappointment. But then I had remembered something my grandmother used to say: "Baby, when you've got nothing left to lose, that's when you're most free to become who you're meant to be." So I had made a choice. Instead of giving up, I would bet everything on myself. I used the small settlement from the divorce money Alex's lawyers had tried to minimize but couldn't eliminate entirely to enroll in culinary school. Not just any culinary school, but the best one I could get into. I studied 16 hours a day, worked nights to pay for living expenses, and graduated at the top of my class. The externship at Le Bernardin in New York had been brutal. The kitchen was a war zone of heat and pressure and impossible standards. I was one of only 3 women in a brigade of 20 cooks, and I had to prove myself every single day. But I learned from masters of the craft, absorbed techniques that most cooks only read about, and discovered I had a gift for creating dishes that were both technically perfect and emotionally resonant. When I returned to the city, I had a choice to make. I could take a safe job as a sous chef somewhere, work my way up slowly through someone else's kitchen, build a conventional career. Or I could take everything I had learned and bet it all on my original dream. I chose the dream. Finding the location for my first restaurant had taken months. I walked every street in the city, looking for the perfect space, somewhere with the right energy, the right foot traffic, the right possibilities. When I found it, a former coffee shop in what was then a transitional neighborhood, I knew it was meant to be mine. The bank loans had been nearly impossible to get. As a divorced woman with limited credit history and no collateral beyond my education and determination, I was exactly the kind of risk that traditional lenders avoided. But I had learned something important during my time at Le Bernardin. Success in the restaurant business wasn't just about cooking. It was about understanding every aspect of the operation, from food costs to labor management to customer psychology. I wrote a business plan that was 50 pages long, backed by detailed market research and financial projections. I presented it to 12 different lenders before I found one willing to take a chance on me. The interest rates were brutal, the terms were harsh, but I had my funding. The first year had been hell. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I was chef, server, dishwasher, and bookkeeper. I slept on a cot in the office because I couldn't afford both rent for an apartment and the restaurant. Some nights, I would lie awake wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, if Alex's family had been right about my naive dreams. But slowly, gradually, word began to spread. Food critics started noticing. Regular customers became evangelists. The neighborhood began to change around me, and my little restaurant was part of what was driving that change. By the end of the second year, I was profitable. By the third year, I was planning my second location. Now, 5 years later, I owned 5 restaurants across the city. I employed over 200 people. I had been featured in national food magazines, had celebrity chefs eating at my establishments, had investors begging me to expand to other cities. And Alex's family had no idea. You're awfully quiet, Rebecca said, breaking into my reverie. Are you feeling all right? I blinked, realizing I had been lost in memories while they continued their discussion of my presumed failures. I'm fine, I said. Just thinking about the past. The past can be painful, Mother Thompson said with false sympathy. But it's important not to dwell on what might have been. Better to focus on making the best of your current situation. Is that what you think I should do? I think you should be practical, she said firmly. You're still young enough to build a stable life, but you need to make smart choices. Find a steady job with benefits, maybe meet a nice man who can provide security. Like Alex provides for Rebecca? The question seemed to catch everyone off guard. Rebecca flushed slightly, and Alex looked up from his plate for the first time in several minutes. Alex and I are partners, Rebecca said stiffly. We both contribute to our relationship. That's nice, I said pleasantly. How long have you been together? 2 years, she said proudly. We met at a charity gala. It was so romantic. Alex was there representing his family's foundation, and I was there with my investment firm. We just clicked immediately. A charity gala, I repeated. How lovely. Which charity? Rebecca looked momentarily flustered. It was, well, there were several organizations being honored that night. It was one of those multi-charity events. I nodded politely, though I noticed she hadn't actually answered my question. It was a small thing, but it added to the growing picture I was forming of Rebecca, someone who dealt in generalities and impressions rather than specifics. And you work in finance? I asked. Investment banking, she said, clearly relieved to be on firmer ground. I specialize in hospitality sector investments. Hotels, restaurants, entertainment venues. It's a very dynamic field. It sounds fascinating. You must know a lot about restaurant valuations. Oh yes, absolutely. It's one of my specialties. What would you say a restaurant like this is worth? The question seemed to surprise her. She glanced around the dining room, taking in the elegant decor, the bustling but efficient service, the tables full of well-dressed diners. Well, that's hard to say without seeing the books, she said carefully. But a place like this, in this location with this level of service, I'd estimate somewhere in the range of 8 to 12 million, depending on the lease terms and profit margins. I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. She was actually quite close. My latest valuation had put Celestial at just over 10 million, and that was just this location. The total value of my restaurant group was significantly higher. That's quite a lot of money, I observed. It is, she agreed. Which is why restaurant ownership is typically limited to people with significant capital or backing. The barriers to entry are just too high for most people. Unless you start small and build up over time. Even then, the failure rate is astronomical. You need more than just cooking skills. You need business acumen, financial backing, marketing expertise, operational experience. Most chefs don't have that complete skill set. What if they did? Rebecca looked confused by the hypothetical nature of my questions. Well, I suppose if someone had all those skills plus adequate funding in the right location, they might have a chance. But it's still incredibly difficult. But not impossible. Not impossible, no. Just highly unlikely. I nodded thoughtfully. What about someone who had lost everything and was starting from nothing? Would that make it more or less likely to succeed? Less likely, obviously, Uncle Robert interjected. Starting a business requires capital. You can't build something from nothing. Can't you? My phone buzzed against the table and I glanced down at it. A text from my sous chef at Celestial. Kitchen running perfectly. VIP table requests to send compliments to chef. Should I mention you're dining tonight? I typed back quickly, not yet. We'll signal when ready. When I looked up, I found Rebecca watching me intently. Important call? She asked. Just work, I said, slipping my phone back into my purse. What kind of work requires attention on Saturday evening? The kind I do. Rebecca's question about my work hanging in the air, I found myself remembering those first brutal months of building my empire. The family sitting around me had no idea what real work looked like, the kind of work that left your hands bleeding and your back aching and your dreams barely alive but still burning. You know, I said, taking a sip of my wine, you're right that starting from nothing is difficult. But there's something liberating about it too. Liberating? Jennifer laughed. How is being broke liberating? When you have nothing left to lose, you stop being afraid of failure. You've already hit bottom. The only direction left is up. That's a very optimistic way to look at poverty, Mother Thompson said with barely concealed disdain. Is it poverty when it's chosen? When it's part of a plan? Uncle Robert set down his fork with obvious frustration. Dara, enough with the philosophical nonsense. Just tell us what you do for a living. I smiled at his impatience. I told you. I cook. Where? Alex demanded. For whom? Stop being so evasive. Looking at his face, older now, harder around the edges than when we were married, I remembered the day I had signed the lease on my first restaurant. I had wanted to call him, to share the excitement and terror of that moment. I had actually picked up the phone, started to dial his number before remembering that he was no longer mine to call. Instead, I had called my sister Monica, who had squealed with excitement and insisted on coming over with champagne to celebrate. We had sat on the floor of that empty restaurant space, drinking cheap champagne out of plastic cups, dreaming about what it would become. You realize you're completely insane, Monica had said, but she was grinning as she said it. Probably, I had agreed. But I'd rather be insane than safe. What if it doesn't work? Then I'll fail spectacularly and at least I'll know I tried. Monica had raised her plastic cup. To spectacular failure or ridiculous success. Nothing in between. Nothing in between, I had agreed. The memory was so vivid I could almost taste that cheap champagne. I wondered what Monica would think if she could see me now, sitting in my flagship restaurant while my ex-husband's family tried to figure out how I could afford to eat there. The thing about starting from nothing, I said aloud, is that you learn to value everything differently. Every small success feels enormous because you remember what it was like to have nothing. What small successes? Rebecca asked skeptically. The first time a customer finishes every bite on their plate. The first positive review. The first night you make a profit instead of just covering costs. I was thinking about my first restaurant, Sage, in what had been a rough neighborhood when I opened it. The space had been tiny, just 30 seats, but I had made every inch count. I had painted the walls myself, refinished the floors on weekends, built the bar with the help of a contractor who was willing to trade work for meals. The opening night had been terrifying. I had invited everyone I knew, called in every favor, posted on every social media platform I could think of. 23 people showed up. 23 people who were willing to take a chance on an unknown chef in an unproven neighborhood. I still remembered their names, could picture their faces. Mrs. Chun from the dry cleaner next door, who ordered the braised short ribs and asked for the recipe. The young couple on their first date, nervous and excited, sharing the chocolate souffle. The food blogger who had come out of curiosity and stayed to write a review that would change my life. The first review was the hardest part, I said, surprising myself by speaking the memory aloud. Review of what? Alex asked, his voice sharp with confusion. I realized I had been speaking without thinking, lost in memories they couldn't understand. Nothing. Just remembering something. But Rebecca was watching me with those sharp eyes, the same look she probably used when analyzing investment opportunities. You talk about this stuff like you lived it, like you actually opened a restaurant. Do I? Yes, you do. And it's weird because if you had actually opened a restaurant, we would know about it. Would you? Of course we would. Alex would have heard about it. His family moves in all the right circles. They hear about every new restaurant, every successful chef. There's no way you could have opened a place without them knowing. I looked around the table at their confident faces. They were so certain of their knowledge, so sure of their connection to everything important that happened in their city. It had never occurred to them that there might be a whole world operating beyond their social circle. Maybe, I said carefully, you don't move in the circles you think you do. The comment hit like a slap. Mother Thompson's face went rigid with offense. Excuse me? I just meant that success can happen in places you might not notice. Not everyone who builds something important moves in the same social circles. Our family is very well connected, Uncle Robert said stiffly. We know everyone worth knowing in this city. Everyone? Everyone who matters. I nodded thoughtfully. It was such a perfect encapsulation of their worldview, the assumption that if they didn't know about something, it wasn't important. If someone wasn't in their social circle, they weren't worth knowing. It reminded me of the night I had won my first major award, Local Chef of the Year, from the city's restaurant association. I had stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of people in the industry, feeling for the first time like I truly belonged. Later that night, at the after-party, I had been surrounded by other chefs, food writers, restaurant owners, all of them excited to talk about food and dreams and the beautiful struggle of the hospitality business. Alex and his family had had no idea the event was even happening. You know, I said, when I was married to Alex, I used to think your social circle was the whole world. I thought if you all didn't approve of something, it wasn't worth doing. The past tense seemed to catch their attention. They all looked slightly uncomfortable, as if I had violated some unspoken rule by directly referencing our shared history. We only wanted what was best for you, Mother Thompson said carefully. Did you? Or did you want what was most convenient for you? That's not fair, Alex said, speaking up for the first time in several minutes. My family supported you. They welcomed you into our world. Your world, I repeated. That's an interesting way to put it. What's that supposed to mean? It means that you saw me as a visitor in your world, not someone who belonged there. And you certainly never considered that I might build a world of my own. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tensions. We were getting closer to the heart of things now, closer to the real reasons why this dinner had been arranged. David appeared at our table again, his timing impeccable as always. How are we doing here? Ready for dessert menus? Yes, please, Mother Thompson said, clearly grateful for the interruption. As David distributed the dessert menus, I caught his eye briefly. He gave me the slightest nod. Everything was ready for the reveal when I was. These desserts look incredible, Jennifer said, studying her menu. The chocolate soufflé sounds amazing. It's our signature dessert, I said without thinking. The words hung in the air for a moment before Rebecca pounced on them. Your signature dessert? That's an odd way to put it. I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. The moment was coming closer, and I could feel the tension building like a symphony approaching its crescendo. I meant, their signature dessert, I corrected smoothly. The restaurant's. But Rebecca wasn't buying it. Her investment banker instincts were kicking in, and she was starting to see patterns that didn't fit. You know, you've been talking about this place all evening like you know it intimately. You know the staff, you know the menu, you even know which dishes are signatures. That's not normal for a casual diner. Maybe I'm not a casual diner. What does that mean? I smiled, feeling the power of the moment building. Maybe I eat here a lot. How often? Oh, I said casually, every day. The words, every day, seemed to hit the table like a small bomb. Everyone froze, processing the implication, trying to figure out how someone they assumed was struggling financially could afford to eat at an expensive restaurant every day. Every day. Uncle Robert's voice was sharp with disbelief. That's impossible. Do you have any idea what that would cost? Quite a lot, I agreed pleasantly. Then how? Jennifer started, then stopped, clearly struggling to formulate a question that wouldn't sound accusatory. Rebecca had no such hesitation. Okay, this is ridiculous. Nobody eats at a place like this every day unless they're independently wealthy. What aren't you telling us? I took a sip of my wine, savoring both the excellent vintage and the moment. What would you like me to tell you? The truth. Alex's voice was louder than he had probably intended, drawing glances from nearby tables. He looked embarrassed and lowered his voice. Just tell us the truth, Dara. What's really going on with you? What do you think is going on? I think, Rebecca said slowly, her analytical mind working through possibilities, that either you're lying about eating here every day or you've come into money somehow. Inheritance? Settlement? New boyfriend with deep pockets. The suggestions were revealing. In their world, the only way someone like me could afford luxury was through luck or dependence on someone else. The possibility that I had earned it myself didn't even occur to them. No inheritance, I said. No boyfriend. No settlement beyond what I got in the divorce. Then how? Mother Thompson demanded. How can you possibly afford to eat at a place like this every day? I looked around the table at their frustrated faces. They had come here expecting to see a broken woman, someone they could pity or feel superior to. Instead, they were confronted with a mystery they couldn't solve, confidence they couldn't shake. Maybe, I said carefully, I get a discount. A discount? Uncle Robert laughed harshly. What kind of discount? A very good one. From who? Are you sleeping with the manager? The crude suggestion hung in the air like smoke. I felt my smile falter for just a moment, reminded of how quickly they defaulted to the assumption that any success I might have must come through relationships with men rather than my own abilities. No, I said quietly. I'm not sleeping with the manager. Then what kind of discount could you possibly get that would make eating here every day affordable? I was quiet for a long moment, letting the question settle over the table. This was at the moment I had been building toward all evening. The moment when their assumptions would collide with reality. The kind of discount, I said slowly, that an owner gives herself. The silence was deafening. I watched their faces as the words registered, as they tried to process what I had just said. Confusion first, then disbelief, then a desperate scramble to make sense of information that didn't fit their worldview. Owner? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. Owner? I confirmed. Owner of what? Alex asked, though I could see in his eyes that he was starting to understand. This restaurant. Celestial. The explosion of reactions was immediate and overlapping. Jennifer's gasp of shock, Uncle Robert's bark of disbelief, Mother Thompson's sharp intake of breath. Rebecca went completely white, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. But it was Alex's reaction that interested me most. He didn't look shocked or disbelieving. He looked sick, as if someone had punched him in the stomach. Because unlike the others, Alex knew me well enough to recognize the truth when he heard it. "That's impossible," Uncle Robert said, his voice shaking with anger. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Yes. You lost everything in the divorce. You had nothing. You couldn't possibly have opened a restaurant, let alone something like this." "Why not?" Because. He was sputtering now, his face red with frustrated disbelief. "Because we would have known. Because you don't have the money or the connections or the experience." "Don't I?" David chose that moment to approach our table, drawn by the obvious tension. "Is everything all right here?" I looked up at him, my most trusted server, someone who had been with me since Celestial opened 3 years ago. "Everything's fine, David. These are my former in-laws. They're just having trouble believing that I own this place." David's face lit up with understanding and barely suppressed amusement. "Oh, well, in that case." He turned to address the table formally. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Ms. Dara Thompson, owner and executive chef of Celestial, as well as Sage, Bloom, Harvest, and Meridian restaurants." The formal introduction hit like a second wave of shock. Not only did I own this restaurant, but I owned 5 restaurants. I was exactly the kind of successful businesswoman they had assumed I could never become. 5 restaurants. Jennifer's voice was faint. 5, David confirmed cheerfully. "Miss Thompson has built quite an empire over the past few years. We're all very proud to work for her." Rebecca looked like she might be sick. "This can't be real. This is some kind of joke." "Would you like me to show you the business license?" David offered helpfully. "Or perhaps Miss Thompson could give you a tour of the kitchen?" "That won't be necessary," I said, though I was enjoying their complete disorientation. "Thank you, David." He nodded and walked away, leaving us in another heavy silence. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to reconcile this new information with everything they thought they knew about me. "How?" Alex's voice was barely audible. "How what? How did you do this? How did you build all of this?" I studied his face, looking for some sign of the man I had once loved. "You really want to know?" He nodded, unable to speak. "I started with nothing like you all assumed. Sleeping on my sister's couch, working 3 jobs, eating ramen noodles for dinner. But instead of staying there, instead of accepting that as my permanent situation, I decided to bet everything on myself." "But the money," Mother Thompson said weakly. "Where did you get the money to start?" "The divorce settlement. The same money your lawyers tried to minimize. I took every penny and invested it in culinary school, then used my education and experience to convince lenders to take a chance on me." "Lenders don't give money to people with no collateral," Uncle Robert protested. "They do if you have a solid business plan and the determination to make it work. It took 12 rejections before I found someone willing to bet on me, but I only needed 1 yes. I watched them process this information, saw the exact moment when they realized what it meant. I hadn't just succeeded despite their doubts, I had succeeded specifically because I had stopped listening to their doubts. The first restaurant was tiny," I continued. 30 seats, no reservations, cash only at first. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I was chef, server, dishwasher, and bookkeeper. Some nights I slept on a cot in the office because I couldn't afford both rent and the restaurant expenses. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Alex asked quietly. The question was so naive it almost made me laugh. "From who? From the family that told me my dreams were unrealistic? From the husband who was embarrassed by my ambitions? From the people who assumed I would fail before I even started?" He flinched as if I had slapped him. "But you know what the beautiful thing was?" I continued. "When you have nothing, when you're truly alone, you discover what you're really capable of. You stop waiting for permission from other people to pursue your dreams." "How long?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "How long have you owned this place?" 3 years. Celestial was my 4th restaurant. I opened it after Sage, Bloom, and Harvest were all successful. 3 years, she repeated. "We've been together for 2 years, Alex. She's owned this place longer than we've been dating." The implication hung in the air. While Alex was moving on with his new life, assuming his ex-wife was struggling to survive, I was building an empire. While his family was crafting a narrative about my failures, I was succeeding beyond their wildest dreams. You let us think you were failing, Jennifer accused. I didn't let you think anything, I replied calmly. You never asked. You assumed, and I didn't correct your assumptions. But why? Why didn't you tell us? I looked around the table at their shocked, confused faces. Because I didn't need your approval anymore. Because I learned that success doesn't require an audience. Because proving myself to you was never the point. The truth of those words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. This dinner wasn't about reconnecting or catching up. It was about their power over me, their ability to make me feel small and unsuccessful. And I had just taken that power away completely. The revelation had shifted the entire dynamic at the table. Where moments before there had been condescension and barely concealed pity, now there was confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked like fear. They were realizing that everything they thought they knew about this evening, about me, about themselves, about the balance of power between us had been wrong. Rebecca was the first to try to recover. I could see her investment banker training kicking in, the same instincts that probably served her well when deals started going sideways. Well, she said, forcing brightness into her voice, this is certainly unexpected. Congratulations on your success. But there was something hollow in her tone, something that suggested the congratulations were costing her considerable effort. Thank you, I said simply. I have to ask though, she continued, if you've been this successful, why did you disappear from everyone's lives? Why maintain the mystery? It was a good question, one that went to the heart of why I had chosen 5 years of silence over any attempt at reconciliation. Because, I said carefully, I needed to find out who I was without your opinions of me. Our opinions? Mother Thompson looked offended. We always supported you. Did you? The challenge hung in the air between us. I could see her trying to rewrite history in real time, to convince herself that their treatment of me had been supportive rather than dismissive. Of course we did, she insisted. We welcomed you into our family. We included you in everything. You included the version of me that you were comfortable with, I corrected. The version that was grateful for your approval and didn't have ambitions that threatened your worldview. That's not fair, Alex said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When I told you about my dream of opening a restaurant, what did you say? He was quiet for a long moment, clearly remembering conversations he probably wished he could forget. I said it was risky. You said it was a vanity project for people who don't understand business. I was trying to protect you from failure. Were you? Or were you protecting yourself from embarrassment? The question hit him visibly. He looked down at his hands, and I saw something in his posture that reminded me of the younger man I had married before his family's influence had taught him to see my dreams as threats to their comfortable assumptions about how the world worked. You know what the worst part was? I continued. It wasn't that you didn't believe in me. It was that you were embarrassed by my believing in myself. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Maybe we should order dessert, she suggested, clearly desperate to change the subject. Good idea, Uncle Robert said quickly. David, could we get some menus? But David was already approaching with dessert menus, his timing perfect as always. As he distributed them, I noticed him glance at me with barely concealed amusement. My staff was enjoying this evening almost as much as I was. The chocolate soufflé is our specialty, David said, addressing the table. Chef Thompson created the recipe herself. It's been featured in 3 national magazines. Chef Thompson? Jennifer repeated weakly. Miss Thompson is a graduate of the Culinary Institute, David explained proudly. She trained at Le Bernardin in New York before returning here to open her restaurants. She's won local chef of the year 3 times running. I had to admire David's commitment to the performance. He was laying it on thick, but every word was true. And each accolade hit the table like another small explosion of disbelief. 3 times? Rebecca's voice was faint. Could have been more, David said cheerfully, but she asked them to consider other chefs after the 3rd win. She felt it was important to share the recognition. As David walked away, I found myself looking at 5 faces that showed varying degrees of shock, confusion, and what might have been respect. But underneath it all, I could see something else brewing, the beginning of anger. You must think this is very funny, Uncle Robert said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. What would be funny about it? Letting us sit here all evening making assumptions while you knew the truth all along. You made assumptions, I corrected. I never encouraged them. You didn't discourage them either. Why would I? Your assumptions told me everything I needed to know about how you really see me. The words were harder than I had intended, but they were true. This evening had been illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. Their immediate assumption that I must be struggling, their inability to conceive that I might have succeeded, their casual dismissal of my capabilities, it all painted a clear picture of what my place had been in their world. "We see you as family," Mother Thompson said stiffly. "Do you? Or do you see me as a problem that was solved when Alex divorced me?" "That's not." She started, then stopped, perhaps realizing that protest would only make things worse. "You know what's interesting?" I said, settling back in my chair. "When I was married to Alex, I was so desperate for your approval. I shaped myself to fit what I thought you wanted me to be. I made myself smaller so you would be more comfortable." "Nobody asked you to do that," Alex said quietly. "Didn't you? Every time I mentioned my dreams and you changed the subject? Every time I talked about my ambitions and you suggested I be more realistic? Every time I tried to contribute to family discussions about business and you smiled condescendingly and patted my hand?" I could see recognition dawning on his face. He was remembering specific moments, specific conversations where he had done exactly what I was describing. "I thought I was being practical," he said weakly. "You were being dismissive. And your family was worse." "Now wait just a minute," Uncle Robert said, his face reddening. "We were nothing but kind to you. You were polite to me. There's a difference. We welcomed you into our circle, introduced you to our friends, included you in our social events. You displayed me like an accessory. Look at Alex's sweet little wife with her cute cooking hobby. Isn't she adorable?" The description clearly hit home because several of them looked uncomfortable. "But the moment I wanted to be more than an accessory," I continued, "the moment I wanted to pursue something meaningful, you made it clear that wasn't acceptable. We wanted you to be happy," Jennifer protested. "You wanted me to be grateful. And quiet. And safely contained within the boundaries you set for what my life should look like." Rebecca had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she leaned forward with a calculating expression. "If you've been this successful for years," she said slowly, "why agree to this dinner? Why come here tonight and let us? Why put yourself through this?" It was the smartest question anyone had asked all evening. Rebecca might be many things, but she wasn't stupid. She could see that this entire evening had been orchestrated, that I had chosen to come here, to this specific restaurant, knowing exactly what would unfold. "That's a very good question," I said. "So what's the answer?" I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Mother Thompson was still trying to process the revelation that her assumptions had been completely wrong. Uncle Robert looked angry and embarrassed. Jennifer seemed confused and perhaps a little hurt. Alex looked like a man who was watching his entire understanding of the past 5 years crumble in real time. And Rebecca looked like someone who was beginning to understand that she had walked into a trap. "The answer," I said carefully, "is that I wanted to see what you would do. How you would treat someone you believed was beneath you. What you would say when you thought I had nothing left to lose." "You set us up," Rebecca said flatly. "I accepted an invitation to dinner. You set yourselves up." "That's not." Uncle Robert started, then stopped, perhaps realizing that arguing would only make him look worse. "You invited me here," I continued, "after 5 years of silence. You chose this restaurant. You chose to spend the evening making assumptions about my life, mocking my career, questioning whether I could afford to eat here. I just let you reveal who you really are." The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truths. They were beginning to understand that every condescending comment, every pitying look, every assumption about my failures had been delivered in my own restaurant to my face, while I listened and took notes. "We didn't mean," Jennifer started weakly. "You didn't mean for me to hear it," I finished. "But you meant every word." David appeared at our table again, his timing impeccable as always. "Have we decided on dessert?" The normalcy of the question felt surreal given the tension crackling around our table. I looked around at the 5 shocked faces staring back at me. "I think," I said slowly, "we'll have the chocolate soufflé. For the table." "Excellent choice," David said. "It's Chef Thompson's signature creation. I'll have it prepared right away." As he walked away, I saw Rebecca watching me with those sharp eyes again. "You're enjoying this," she said quietly. "Am I?" "Yes. You're getting revenge." The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Revenge. Was that what this was? Is it revenge to let people show you who they really are? It is when you orchestrate the situation specifically for that purpose. I considered her words carefully. She wasn't entirely wrong. I had accepted this invitation knowing exactly where it would lead. I had chosen to remain silent about my success specifically so I could watch them reveal their true feelings about me. Maybe, I said finally. But if so, it's the most honest revenge I can imagine. I didn't lie to you or trick you. I just gave you the opportunity to be yourselves. And we failed the test, Alex said quietly. I really looked at him for the first time all evening. There was something broken in his expression, something that looked almost like grief. Did you? I asked. Didn't we? We spent the entire evening assuming you were struggling, mocking your career choices, questioning whether you belonged here. We were. He paused, struggling with the words. We were cruel. Yes, I said simply. You were. The admission seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. I don't understand, Mother Thompson said suddenly. If you've been so successful, why not tell us? Why maintain the estrangement? We could have celebrated your achievements, supported your business. I almost laughed at the suggestion. Could you have? Really? Of course. Then why didn't you celebrate them when they were just dreams? Why didn't you support them when they were just possibilities? The question silenced her. Because we all knew the answer. They hadn't supported my dreams because they hadn't believed in them. They hadn't celebrated my ambitions because they had been embarrassed by them. People change, Jennifer said hopefully. We could change. Could you? I asked. Or would you just want to claim credit for my success now that it's undeniable? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I could see them trying to formulate denials, but the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down they knew I was right. The chocolate soufflé arrived with the kind of theatrical presentation I had personally designed. David wheeled over a small cart with the soufflé in its ramekin, still puffed and golden from the oven, accompanied by a small pitcher of warm chocolate sauce and a bowl of fresh whipped cream. Ladies and gentlemen, David announced with pride, Chef Thompson's signature chocolate soufflé with Madagascar vanilla bean sauce and hand-whipped cream. He served it with careful ceremony, spooning the dessert onto individual plates and drizzling the sauce with artistic flourish. The aroma that rose from the warm chocolate was intoxicating, rich and complex, with hints of espresso and a touch of sea salt that elevated the entire experience. I watched their faces as they took their first bites. Despite everything that had happened this evening, despite the tension and revelations and uncomfortable truths, the soufflé was perfect. Light as air but intensely chocolatey, with a texture that melted on the tongue and flavors that built and evolved with each bite. Oh my God, Jennifer whispered. This is incredible. It's the best dessert I've ever had, Rebecca admitted reluctantly, as if the words were being pulled from her against her will. Uncle Robert said nothing, but I watched him close his eyes as he savored another spoonful, the expression on his face one of pure culinary bliss. You created this? Alex asked quietly. I did. He struggled for words. It's extraordinary. I felt a flutter of the old pride, the same feeling I got every time someone truly appreciated my food. It was the reason I had become a chef in the first place, not for money or recognition, but for these moments when food became a bridge between souls. Thank you, I said simply. We ate in relative silence for several minutes, the dessert creating a temporary truce in the emotional battlefield our table had become. But I could feel the tension building again, questions and realizations simmering just beneath the surface. Finally, Rebecca set down her spoon and looked directly at me. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. This whole evening, it wasn't just about letting us reveal ourselves, was it? You had another purpose. I admired her perceptiveness. She was putting together pieces that the others were still struggling to see. What makes you think that? Because you're too smart to waste an entire evening just to prove a point. And because, she paused, studying my face. Because there's something you want from us. Something you need to say or do to close this chapter of your life. She was partially right. There was something I needed from this evening, though it wasn't what she was imagining. What do you think I want? I asked. I think you want us to apologize. To acknowledge what we did wrong, how we failed you. I think you want closure. Do I? Don't you? I considered her question carefully. Did I want an apology? Would it mean anything if they offered one now, when my success was undeniable? Would sorry words change the years of doubt and dismissal I had endured? I think, I said slowly, that apologies only matter when they come from understanding, not from being caught. What does that mean? It means that if you apologize now, it's because you've been proven wrong, not because you understand what you did wrong. The distinction was important and I could see them struggling with it. An apology motivated by embarrassment was worthless. An apology motivated by genuine understanding of harm caused might have value. Then what do you want? Alex asked desperately. Tell us what you want, Dara. Tell us how to make this right. I looked at him, my former husband, the man I had once loved more than my own dreams, and felt a mix of sadness and something that might have been pity. I don't want you to make it right, Alex. I want you to understand that it can't be made right. Why not? Because the damage wasn't just in what you said or did. The damage was in what you believed about me. And beliefs like that don't change just because you're confronted with evidence that contradicts them. That's not true, Mother Thompson protested. We can learn. We can grow. Can you? Then tell me, what did you learn tonight? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly struggling to articulate an answer. I learned that I was wrong about your capabilities, she said finally. Did you? Or did you learn that I succeeded despite your expectations? What's the difference? The difference is that one suggests you understand I was always capable of this success. The other suggests you think I got lucky. The distinction silenced her. Because the truth was, they still couldn't quite believe that the woman they had dismissed so easily had built something this substantial. Part of them was still looking for external explanations, luck, help from others, some factor that would make my success less threatening to their worldview. I excused myself from the table, ostensibly to visit the restroom but actually to check on the kitchen. It was a Saturday night, our busiest service, and I wanted to make sure everything was running smoothly. The kitchen was in full swing when I entered, a carefully choreographed dance of 23 cooks working in perfect harmony. The sound was a symphony I had learned to read like music. The sizzle of proteins hitting hot pans, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the controlled chaos of orders being called and confirmed. My sous chef, Maria, looked up from the pass where she was plating entrees. How's the show going? She asked with a grin. Better than I expected. They figure it out yet? David helped with the reveal. You should have seen their faces. Maria laughed. I wish I could have been there. You want me to comp the meal? No, I said quickly. They can pay full price. But make sure David takes excellent care of them. Of course. Anything else? I looked around my kitchen at the gleaming equipment I had selected, the systems I had designed, the team I had built. This was my world now, the empire I had constructed from nothing but determination and skill. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I want you to do something for me. I quickly typed instructions to David, explaining exactly how I wanted the evening to end. The final act of this performance needed to be perfect. When I returned to the table, I found them in heated discussion that stopped abruptly when they saw me approaching. Everything all right? I asked pleasantly. We were just. Alex started, then seemed to think better of whatever he had been about to say. We were discussing our behavior tonight, Rebecca said bluntly. And trying to figure out what comes next. What comes next? Between us, this family. Whether there's any possibility of. She struggled for words. Of rebuilding bridges. I settled back into my chair and looked around the table. They were all watching me expectantly, as if my answer would determine something important about their own futures. Do you want to rebuild bridges? I asked. Yes, Alex said immediately. Why? The simple question seemed